I want to start this conversation off by asking you some questions about Russia's involvement in the Middle East. I've heard reports that Israel actually struck a Russian base in Syria that Netanyahu has been trying to call Putin, and Putin is refusing to accept any calls from Netanyahu. And also that Russia was shooting down Israeli missiles that were being fired into Lebanon from, I'm not exactly sure where they were shooting down from. Maybe you can tell me later. And also, there's this news about Russia and Iran signing a mutual defense contract within the coming weeks. So this seems like all quite big news. But first of all, can you tell me all these things I said, are they true? Can you verify them?
Some of them, well, at least one is definitely not true. I heard that report about the strike on the Russian military base in Syria. Then it was later geolocated outside of the base. It was a city outside of the base that was hit. But it was close to the base. Now this report about the Israeli missiles being shot down by the Russians. I think it's supposed to have the interceptors were supposed to have been fired from some Russian ships. I just heard that report once. I haven't seen any confirmation. I have no idea if that's true. But actually, the Russians have supplied the Syrians with S-300 systems and other air defense systems. And, so the Syrians with Russian help have been shooting down a lot of Israeli missiles over the years. I guess it would be a first if they was actually fired directly from a Russian ship, but it wouldn't be a huge change from the current situation. About Putin calling, what I heard is he attempted to call, not Putin, but rather Netanyahu attempted to call Putin, and Putin refused to call. That's something that was news that was leaked by the Kremlin. I've heard that a couple of times. So I think that's likely true. And it would show, I think that's very significant. It shows it shows really how far Israel's stock has fallen. It was at the beginning of this conflict, Russia actually tried to maintain kind of a neutral position. But as the carnage has continued, Russia has distanced itself increasingly from Israel and has become very hostile to Israel. Now, again, this is a real change. A few years ago, I believe it was just a few years ago, Netanyahu actually attended a Victory Day parade in Moscow. Now he's clearly persona non grata. It's very rare for the Russians to actually refuse a call from a foreign leader. And, it's a signal of very strong disapproval. So it just shows this is this is where it's talking about how this campaign in Gaza and now Lebanon has really hurt Israel's diplomatic position, its position within the international community. It's increasingly become a pariah. And, this is probably one of the most striking examples of this. If Russia, before maintained, not warm relations, but maintained relations, try to again be neutral with respect to Israel, that's gone. And in general, the world has become very hostile to Israel. Israel has become, I think as many have said correctly, the most hated country in the world.
Well, what about this mutual defense contract
Okay,
between Iran
that's
and
something
Russia?
we knew that was coming. They've been talking about that for months. It's something that the Russians and the Iranians have been working on for quite a while, and they've scheduled a signing ceremony for roughly 3 weeks from now, this month. So this, is definitely on track. It's going to happen. Now we don't know the details of this pact that's going to be signed, but we'll find out. Again, it signals a increasing cooperation. A tightening of the relationship between Russia and Iran.
Right. And does Russia have ships in the area? And where are they located? I mean,
No, I don't. Well, they do. They have a naval base actually on the Syrian coast. That's one of their few, bases really outside of Russia. So they don't, they don't have many ships, but they have a few.
Okay, well, with this defense contract that's going to be signed between Russia and Iran, we don't know the details of it yet, but I think it's significant. Plus the fact that Putin's refusing to talk to Netanyahu and their help aiding in defending Syrian airspace. Do you see this as potentially a catalyst into a greater conflict that would involve Russia as well, with on one side Russia and Iran in Syria and the U.S. and Israel on the other side, because that's quite terrifying.
Yeah. Well, there's always the risk of it. I mean, because Russia is present in Syria. It is a close ally of the Syrian government. It has a base there. Um, I think it's clear that Russia wants to avoid entanglement in the war. Again, they do have their hands full in Ukraine. They don't need another front, and they don't want to, and it could easily spin out of control and become a war between Russia and the U.S. I think actually both the U.S. and Russia really want to avoid any kind of direct conflict. And in fact, they have, like in places like Syria, they have established deconfliction channels. There have been some incidents in the past. Russian soldiers have been killed, and I think maybe some Americans as well. And they have avoided, they've communicated with each other and have avoided, these incidents into growing into larger conflicts. So I think there's no question that the U.S. and Russia do not want to be drawn into this war. But again, the wild card is, as always, Netanyahu and his government. Israel's on a rampage, as we say, and who knows? It's just like he's constantly doing what he can, and he's now showing some success to create a wider war. It looks like we do have that on our hands. It looks like it's actually already begun, and he will do what he can because, again, he's reckless. He's frankly wicked. Has no concern for any lives outside of his own and those of his own people. But he's also very smart. I mean, he's calculating, he's conniving, and he knows that he actually can't win this war. So clearly the calculation is that he'll bring in the U.S. somehow. And he'll do it by whatever means. He's shown that he just has there are no limits to what he will do. And if his efforts so far fail to bring in the U.S., who knows what he could do, what he might try to pull off in Syria, and it may even involve the Russians. We just don't know.
Well, you say he's a smart man, but if he's making these calculations, if he's aware that Putin is clearly is going to stand up to him, he won't even accept his calls, and this defense contract with Iran, shouldn't that act as a deterrent? I mean, because if we look at terms of proxy wars, you look what's happening in Ukraine. If we're talking about these great powers, the U.S. and Russia engaging in a proxy war, it seems clear that Russia has the upper hand. And especially if we're talking about in this region where, they share a continent with Russia. And we've been stretched thin in Ukraine. The NATO's been throwing everything they have, and we're running low on munitions, and everything's getting chewed up. Our weapon systems are being dismantled through electronic warfare and, missile superiority from Russia. So if he's a smart man, do you think, is it possible that Netanyahu's like, okay, I can't get Russia to stand down or be on my side. Maybe I have to back down because this is also needs to play into his calculations, right?
Right. Yeah, I'm not saying that he is going to try to bring Russia in. I think probably that would not be to his advantage.
Or deter him from attacking Iran, I would say, just because of Russia's support to Iran.
Right.
Do you think that's possible?
Okay, you think it would? No. I mean, it seems clear that that's what he's bent on doing, right? He's very clever, but that doesn't mean that he can't miscalculate, can make a
he's
terrible
not very
miscalculation.
smart then.
Well,
you say he's smart.
Smart people do very stupid things, But it's just like, just like as in, in Ukraine, the West, NATO and the U.S. clearly miscalculated. They assumed that they had Russia on the ropes. They were going to, through the sanctions and through military support for the Ukrainian army, they were going to bring about the collapse of Russia. And it would result in the overthrow. This is something that they believed that they could do. And now they miscalculated badly. And I think that Netanyahu is doing something similar here. That he assumes that, again, there's also this, I think, this abiding faith in the power of the U.S., the sense on a lot of people within the U.S. and the U.S. allies that the U.S. power is unlimited. And now it's been shown to be a very serious error. I didn't think it was unlimited, but like before the Russian war, I thought that if surely, once things get, if this war comes underway, our military industrial complex will start churning out those weapons or whatever. It hasn't happened because it turns out that we have a really puny, military industrial complex. We have some showy weapons. Some of them are pretty effective, but we just can't make many of them. I'll give you an example. In this recent Iranian retaliation against Israel, the U.S. was involved in the air defense. They had 2 ships that fired a total of 12 SM-3 air defense missiles, very expensive missiles. And maybe some of them even hit their targets, Now, do you know how many?
Whoa.
We make 12 in a year. So that was a year's worth.
Are you serious?
I am serious. We make a total of 12 in a year of these SM-3 missiles. So that's it. No more of these. So, it just tells you, and we already know what's happening. Like the Patriot interceptors are basically gone, and we can only make 550 in a year. And again, you need 2 for each incoming missile, and each one costs $4 million.
Yeah, it's
so
unbelievable.
Yeah. So anyway, I think it's a very serious miscalculation on his part. Now, the pressure will be on again, especially if this escalates and it shows every indication that this conflict between Israel and Iran will continue to escalate. The pressure will be on as we go up the escalation ladder for the U.S. to become involved. There's going to be tremendous pressure within the U.S. to come to Israel's support, especially if it starts looking bad for Israel. And I think it will over time. And it's clearly something that the Pentagon does not want to do. They tried to avoid in the past. And they know, they have these sitting duck bases. And I think they've also, the Pentagon has come out and said recently, hey, we don't have many missiles. And I don't think people really believe them, or really just not getting through the thick skulls of the politicians. But
Netanyahu has to understand that a bit as well, because you say Netanyahu might be making a miscalculation like what we did with Ukraine.
Yeah.
Okay, with Ukraine, I understand. Nobody really knew Russia's capabilities. Nobody knew the extent of the rot in our own military-industrial complex and our lack of a manufacturing base to produce weaponry. So I understand. A lot of people, myself included, assumed different things would be differently. But now Netanyahu has the fortune of hindsight because of what we've seen in Ukraine. He knows. He should be able to see that this isn't working well. So
right.
How can he also miscalculating again?
Yeah. Well, again, he has this history of, he's been president for the better part of 20 years, and the U.S. has always done his bidding. They've always supplied him with what he's needed in this, the recent war against Gaza and Lebanon, all those 2,000-pound bombs or whatever, they just keep on coming and they keep on coming. And he sees the U.S. as a horn of plenty, and, for it just kind of like an infinite, the supply seems to be infinite there. I think maybe the U.S. is making some noises about, hey, we can't give you so much of these anymore or whatever. But again, a lot of these politicians don't seem to really understand it or to believe it. And he just, and the neocons with whom Netanyahu's closely allied, they don't seem to understand it either. As part of being a neocon is having this faith in a kind of a limitless U.S. military power. And that's a mistake on their part. But, they're clever people, but they do have this faith, I think, in U.S. power that's really blinded them to the realities. And it just seems like a lot of them aren't getting the message. We'll see. But I think that he doesn't fully understand, or he just refuses to hear the warnings. I'm sure that's like some of his own military is warning him about this, and he's getting warnings from the Pentagon, but he's not listening. He's always ignored them in the past, and things have worked out. See, this is one thing. You get a track record of always being proven right. It's like, I know I mentioned this at the beginning of World War II. A lot of Hitler's generals expressed doubts about, his plans to invade France, and he urged caution, and then he ignored them, and then launched the blitzkrieg attacks, and they were enormously successful. And it was just sort of like, yeah, I'm not listening to these guys. Now they started making some warnings about the Soviet Union, and he should have listened to them, but he didn't. He just thought, I trust these guys. They're always just a bunch of, they're cowards. They're too timid. We need some brave leader like myself, and decisive. We got to go ahead and do this. And he should have listened to them. And maybe we're seeing something similar here.